Thank you, Prime Minister. Dave Boat from the Daily Mirror. Prime Minister, it's been reported over the weekend that the £2 cap on bus fares across England is going to be scrapped in the budget. What's your assessment on the impact this would have on working people who would expect the Labour Party to be on their side? And just as an addition to that, if I may, do you think Mike Ainsbury should resign?
I mean, literally, I cannot possibly overemphasize how terrible this policy is in every single regard. Okay? I cannot possibly explain how terrible it is unilaterally as an awful policy. To do this on grounds of fixing the foundations. So, first of all, optically, this is just terrible. It's terrible optics. From an objective point of view, if I just put my Labour strategist hat on for a second and talk about how this is going to affect the discourse moving forward, how it's going to affect how people view the Labour Party, all of this talk being on the side of working people, all of this talk of fixing the foundations upon the broadest shoulders. Now, of course, this is coming under the shadow of the means testing of the winter fuel payment, of all of the incredibly well-off pensioners who were just above the threshold, who apparently are now, quote-unquote, the broadest shoulders with which we should be fixing the foundations on. And then on top of this, they're going to do this for a group, a sector of society who rely on cheap public transport, which is the working people on the bottom end of the income scale. And these are the people, especially in the northern communities, in the rural communities, who require subsidy to help public transport because it's very little profitability for the privately owned bus companies to run effective services in these areas because there are fewer people there and the bus routes are more spread out because of the nature of rural living. These are seats that Labour really can't lose, especially with people who should be their natural voting demographic, but doesn't quite gel with them on a kind of cultural level, who may have supported them, may have lent their vote to Labour at the last election, and are now going to be absolutely seething with rage, first of all because of the winter fuel means test, and now they're going to have to pay more for the bus, especially if you're a poor person. When it comes to the whole demographic of people who are on low wages, the vast majority of these people do not own a car. They require public transport to get to work. And a lot of them are going to use the bus because it's cheaper than the train, cheaper than potentially a tram, certainly cheaper than an Uber, of course. And this is increasing by up to 50%. 50% increase on the bus tickets that the poorest in society are paying. The same people who you say are at the heart of how you make policy. This mixed message is going to go down terribly, terribly with the electorate. I saw David Littlefair, an NEC candidate for the Labour Party, saying that they're going to lose swathes of seats in the May Council elections because of this. And fundamentally, that's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Because the second half of this is just following on from that, is the actual social effect this is going to have. Making the poorest in society pay more is going to make their lives materially worse. There is huge amounts of negative utility to this policy at a time in which, actually, there's a huge argument given. First of all, it'll be good for the economy if people are more mobile. Extra mobility of people by, for example, giving more subsidy to bus companies, the ones that they say they want to give local authorities the power to take into public ownership, to be able to subsidise that so that people can get to work easier, to be more mobile so that people move around and you don't have to be specifically investing in certain areas for there to be jobs available that people are easy to get to. This is good for economic growth, which they say is their central mission. And on top of that, it means that people from these poorer areas of society, these poor classes of society, are going to have less to be able to spend on consumption elsewhere. That would also be kind of taxable as well. We taxable income. We taxable spending. We VAT inclusive if they had extra money spare at the end of the day, at the end of the month, outside of what they're spending on necessary spending to be able to get to work in the first place, which is the way that they produce economic growth, is by actually being productive and going to work in the first place. That's where the growth is going to come from. There's an anti-growth policy when they say that their central mission is having the highest sustained growth in the G7, right? That's their key mission they tout all the way up to the election. And they're actively taking a policy strategy that is antithetical to that central mission. It's terrible policy when they talk about net zero. When they talk about trying to have net zero by 2050, the key part of how we're going to get to net zero is disincentivizing car usage. You know how induced demand works in one way? If you make it cheaper or more accessible, more people will use it. Like if you build the extra lane, or if you remove the toll road, for example, you make it cheaper and you make it higher capacity to take a car, more people will take the car. That's induced demand. It doesn't solve like traffic problems, for example. It also works in the other way. If you make public transport less accessible, if you make it more expensive, if you input less investment in, we have fewer routes available, fewer people will use it, and they will go to the only alternative, which is driving their fucking car, which is the exact thing we need to disincentivize if we want to reach net zero, unless, of course, I don't know, you've been bought out by the electric vehicle lobby, for example. Not saying that they have done, I have no evidence for this, but that's certainly something that would be pushed as a policy to replace public transport. We're already seeing this from the Silicon Valley tech bro billionaires, the people who actually don't want to see a sea change in the way in which we engage in transportation. They just want to be the ones who have the cutting edge technology that reinvents the wheel in the way in which motorists drive in this country or across the world. If we wanted to get to net zero, we should be making public transport free, more accessible, more widely available, get people out of their cars. It would be better for our cities. Our cities would be better if we didn't have to give so much of our city space to parking spaces, for these massive hunks of metal driving through city centres, being dangerous for our children, polluting our city centres. Of course, that would be less likely when we move to electric, but even so, they require a lot of fossil fuels to be able to build in the first place, to create in the first place. There's only so much net zero that you can have when you have to mine cobalt in the Congo for the electric batteries that go inside these electric cars. And on top of that, you have to set aside huge amounts of city space for parking and roads and on-street parking. And they get mad when you try and charge them, like we saw in Bristol. When this is space people could be walking. They could be using our cities to be able to actually walk and congregate and using it as third spaces. But no, we have to use it for cars. And what's the one thing that would allow these spaces to be more open for people? High quality, cheap and available public transportation. And what are they doing? What are they doing with that? They're making it more expensive. They're ruining their central missions. They are going back on a central theme of one of their big policies in terms of net zero, and they are pissing off and directly attacking an electorate that they absolutely need to keep on board come the next election. Again, if you're a Labour Party supporter, you must be watching this with your head in your hands, going, what the hell is my party doing? What the hell are we doing politically? Because there are some things people aren't going to forget. And Labour coming into government and making the mode of transport that is most taken by the poorest in society and making it more expensive after promising to balance the books on the shoulders of those with the broadest shoulders, it's going to sting. It's going to bloody sting. And they will get absolutely hammered at the local elections, and they will deserve it. Because for all of her faults, right, Lisa Nandy was right during the leadership election. And then actually, we talk about grand plans a lot. We talk about 5-year plans. We talk about big budget measures that are going to revamp the economy. There's £65 billion of investment. The things that people really pay attention to is the things in their life that they perceive as being important to their daily life. And slightly more expensive bus travel is the kind of thing people are definitely going to notice in the way they won't notice the government opining about how wonderful they are, that they got loads of investment in film studios in Buckinghamshire, which is obviously a good thing that I support. But that's not going to be electorally viable, as opposed to just getting the buses fixed. That was the main thing people talked about on the campaign, on the road, on the campaign during Lisa Nandy's election campaign to be the Labour leader in 2020, was people saying, well, actually, I don't really care about all of this Westminster stuff. I just want the buses to run on time. I want the buses to be cheap and affordable. I want local transportation to be good. I want our city centres to not be crap. And what we're doing is making our city centres crapper by making the public transport more expensive, which is going to reduce demand in car transportation. It's just a traumatically stupid policy in every single possible way. And on top of that, it saves fuck all. It literally saves fuck all in the government budget. Their justification is, well, the Tories didn't fund this any further than this year. That's their justification. Well, just fund it. In Scotland, they're funding free bus travel for young people. And what do we get? More expensive travel for young people who have like the lowest level of disposable income of any age demographic in this fucking country. And we're still making it more expensive and harder for them. It's so bad. It's so bad. Honestly.
We're going for one question, otherwise we'll start but let me just deal with both those issues. Look, on the £2 bus fare, first thing to say is the Tories only funded that till the end of 2024. And therefore that is the end of the funding in relation to the £2 capped fare. I do know how much this matters, particularly in rural communities where there's heavy reliance on buses. And that's why I'm able to say to you this morning that in the budget we will announce there'll be a £3 cap on bus fares to the end of 25, because I know how important it is. So that'll be...
And literally, they're increasing it by 50%, and they're only promising to keep it for 1 year. They're only promising to keep that bus cap for 1 bloody year.
There in the budget on Wednesday. On Mike Amesbury, look...
And if you really needed to understand how the public are going to react to this, I'm just going to go back to my pollster du jour, Luke Trill from Moore in Common, who was speaking to LBC about this very policy earlier today. If you want an idea of why removing the £2 bus fare cap may be so damaging beyond polls, read Greg's quote from our focus group. At a time of deep political distrust, it's one of the few recent examples of a policy people can point to that tangibly improves their lives for the better. My mum knows all about the £2 bus fare. She goes on about it all the time. She's never mentioned anything political to me before, but the £2 bus fare genuinely had an effect on her life. Something like that. Something like that is simple and easy. It will stick with you, and it's why people like it. And they're taking what could be huge amounts of political goodwill and they're flushing it down the toilet. They are spaffing it all over the walls on something that's super simple, super easy, and really cheap to do. Like, imagine how many young people in Scotland are now wedded to the SNP over their free transportation that they now get. Something really simple, really cheap to do, and massively affects the quality of life of loads of people, and really affects them in a way that speaks to the public and captures their imagination. And they're taking that and going, black hole in nations' finances, gotta tighten our belts, even you proles who get on the bus to go to work every day. Just... the absolute nadir of political messaging. It's one of those things that goes beyond politics, or at least one of those things that really makes politics resonate with people. It's like when you took away educational maintenance allowance, or when Nick Clegg broke his promise on tuition fees, and a whole generation of young people were immediately affected by a giant rise in how much it was going to cost them to get an education. It shit sticks. It's a direct effect, it directly sticks, and people do not forget, and more importantly, they do not forgive. And Keir Starmer's doing both, alongside the means testing of the winter fuel payment. Young people, middle-aged working people, students, and old people are all having to be asked to tighten their belts. under the guise of only fixing the foundations by asking those with the broadest shoulders to pay for it. Just a masterclass in terrible, traumatically poor political acumen. Again, from the political mastermind, big galaxy brain theories of Morgan Bloody McSweeney. People still call Thatcher the milk snatcher. Exactly, a single policy. Thatcher the milk snatcher. Like, we're never going to stop calling him Sir Kid Starver, are we? Like, the Sir Kid Starver allegations are never going to go away after his commitment to the two-child benefit cap in progressive circles. But that's just us, right? For the rest of the country, he'll be the guy who took the money away from the grannies and the one who made the buses more expensive. But this is what you get from putting the adults in the room. I want everybody. I want every single FBPE person, every single liberal who tried to describe these people as the adults in the room to at least explain what the hell they mean by that. So all they care about is vibes. Corbyn was big bad jam man, evil man, and Keir Starmer is sensible vibes man in suit. Comes to policy, rhetoric, strategy, politics, anything like that at all, they couldn't give you an answer because it's clear that Keir Starmer hasn't got a clue what he's doing, and neither does his team. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.